One of those slippery words that Devin was mentioning came up in several different ways in our conversation today, and that's transitional. In one way, we were using it to describe perhaps the marginalized workers that might be displaced and how to handle them. Another is in terms of, for example, installing a solar roof is a one-time event, like a transitional job. As long as there's lots of them to do, that's there, but they're not continuing jobs ad infinitum. And related to that, just a final comment, apropos of shades of green, it appears to be that there's also shades of brown, and less browning is becoming almost, the old brown is the new green or something. So I mean, it's getting confusing. For example, the former head of Greenpeace is now touting nuclear as a green jobs creator. So if I could have some help in deconstructing that one.
Well, maybe one thought. I mean, I think your points are well taken. And one thing we sort of grappled with in the report is to say, well, so how do we deal with this in terms of, for example, efficiency, right? If you take the transportation sector, is it good enough to increase efficiency of cars as much as the Congress has done in a recent piece of legislation, right? I forget what the numbers are. I think something like 35 mpg by 2020 or so from about 27 right now. Right. I mean, clearly it's progress, right, of a certain kind. But again, relative to the challenge that we face, I mean, we can't just take our time and sort of mosey along, but we have to do this as fast as possible. You could say, well, achieving that level by 2020 is good, but it's not good enough, right? And then particularly if you figure not only is the number of cars and trucks and buses and whatever is on the roads going to be as is now, but it may continue to grow. I mean, certainly it is growing in countries like China and India. It's growing massively. So there is this need to not just be marginally more efficient, but to really be more efficient to a degree where you can say it really makes a substantial difference. And I think that's really where the shades of green again comes in. I mean, yes, there may be a shade of it, but if it's not enough of a shade, then, yes, maybe it's more brown than green, as you say.
We're talking about green jobs making significant progress towards reducing the environmental footprint of economic activity. But you can sort of get around the definitional dilemma of just how green it needs to be by taking scenarios, for example, of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. If we have 20 years to reach peak emissions and then we need a decline by 50% for the year 2050, that gives you a basis for scenarios. Al Gore uses scenarios in his movie, etc. And you can look at what needs to happen in individual sectors to get there. And you can then see just how much are the jobs that you're looking at contributing to that. It's in fact the way that the European trade union movement undertook a study of jobs in a low-carbon Europe. They took scenarios that would make the economies reach the climate goals, climate protection goals, and then looked at what would the employment impacts of that would be. And of course, you said installing a solar roof is a one-time affair. That is not quite true. You need to compare jobs over the life cycle, of course, of a product in the employment intensity, and you will compare a situation with much more public transport as opposed to much more individual car-based transportation. When they did that, they found that there is a net gain in that transition, and it holds up over time, even if the green jobs will be subject to the same improvements and increases in labor productivity that others have been, as they should be. So if you all things being equal, you would still have a net gain over a lifetime. And I think just how green we have to be will ultimately be due to just how ambitious the environmental targets need to be that we have to reach.
Heather?
Yeah, I agree with what Peter said. I also think it's difficult to signal by policy change or how we signal what types of employment choices should be made or farming choices. I'm just thinking of a couple of examples that I've seen in Ghana where, for example, the government knew that there were more opportunities for biofuels and thought that was also good for the environment, and so gave the signal to farmers to plant more palm oil. More palm for palm oil. And so, but what was happening then is more clear cutting of forested areas. And so it was very difficult, I think, to take the holistic picture of what direction should be promoted for greening jobs there. Another example is mining, where some people are promoting artisanal mining, others are against it. People are marshaling different ecological footprint issues for one side or the other. I think what it really requires at the national level is some kind of an interministerial framework that involves a lot of different sources of information, because we may know how dire the situation is, but it's very hard to plan which direction to go in.